July 12, 1943, Prokhorovka, Soviet Union. The body was found at dawn, slumped against the turret of a destroyed Panzer V Panther, serial number 324. His face was frozen in an expression of disbelief. No wounds, no burns. Just his eyes, wide open, staring at something no one else could see. The German rescue crew whispered the same thing over and over. He saw the ghost. 3 days earlier, Hauptmann Klaus Brenner had been the most feared tank commander in the 2nd SS Panzer Division. Now he was just another casualty of a battle that would rewrite everything the world thought it knew about armored warfare. The Panther was supposed to be invincible. 75mm KWK 42 L/70 gun. Frontal armor 80mm thick, sloped at 55 degrees. On paper, it could tear through any Soviet tank from 2 kilometers away. The engineers in Berlin had promised superiority. The generals had promised victory. Operation Citadel, they called it. The great offensive that would break the Soviet lines at Kursk and turn the tide of the Eastern Front. Brenner believed every word. He had spent 2 weeks hunting T-34s across the wheat fields south of Prokhorovka, watching them explode like toys through his commander's optics. 16 confirmed kills. He carved a mark into the turret for each one. He thought he was hunting wolves. He didn't realize he had walked into a pack. The morning of July 12th began like any other. Heavy fog rolled across the Sel River Valley, turning the landscape into a wall of gray mist. Brenner's Panther idled near the edge of a sunflower field, its Maybach HL230 P30 engine rumbling like distant thunder. The crew was tired. They had been fighting for 5 days straight, pushing deeper into Soviet territory with every engagement. But something felt different that morning. The radio chatter was frantic, scattered reports of massive Soviet tank columns moving west. Hundreds of them, maybe more. Brenner dismissed it as exaggeration. Soviet tanks were no match for German steel. That's what he told his crew. That's what he told himself. Then the fog lifted, and the world turned red. They came from everywhere at once. Not in formation, not in neat, predictable lines like the training manuals described. They came like a flood. T-34 76s and the newer T-34 85s pouring over the hills in waves, engines screaming, tracks churning the earth into mud. Brenner counted 20, then 40, then he stopped counting. The radio exploded with voices, panicked and overlapping. Contact front, multiple targets. His gunner, a boy from Munich, barely 18 years old, froze at his station. Brenner screamed at him to fire. The first shot hit a T-34 square in the hull. It lurched, burned, and kept coming. The second shot missed. The third jammed. That's when Brenner understood. This wasn't a battle. This was an execution. The T-34s weren't trying to win with superior firepower. They were using speed, numbers, and raw aggression to close the distance where the Panthers' advantages disappeared. At 50 meters, armor didn't matter anymore. At 30 meters, skill didn't matter, only survival. Brenner ordered his driver to reverse, but the ground was soft from the morning dew. The Panthers' track spun, digging deeper into the mud. A T-34 rammed them from the side, metal screaming against metal. The impact threw Brenner against the turret wall. Blood filled his mouth. His ears rang. Through the vision port, he saw the Soviet tank pull back, then accelerate again. The driver was shouting something. The gunner from Munich was crying. Brenner reached for the hatch, but before he could open it, another T-34 appeared in his peripheral vision. This one didn't ram, it just stopped. 10 meters away. Close enough that Brenner could see the commander standing in the open hatch, staring directly at him. The Soviet officer was young, dirt-streaked face, no expression. He didn't raise his weapon. He didn't give an order. He just watched. For 5 seconds that felt like an eternity, the two men locked eyes across the smoke and fire. Then the Soviet officer raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, and pointed at Brenner. Not at the tank, at him, as if marking him, as if saying, I see you." The T-34's gun swung toward the Panther's armor. Brenner screamed for his crew to bail out. The loader made it through the hatch. The driver didn't. The gunner from Munich never even tried. Brenner threw himself out just as the world turned white. The explosion lifted him off his feet and slammed him into the ground. When he looked up, his Panther was burning. The turret had been blown 15 meters away. The Soviet tanks were already moving past him, hunting the next target. And that young Soviet officer was still watching him, still pointing. Brenner crawled into a shell crater and stayed there for 6 hours. When the rescue crew found him, he couldn't speak. He just kept staring at his hands, turning them over and over, as if checking to see if he was still real. They brought him back to the aid station, gave him water, gave him morphine, but he wouldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that finger pointing at him. 3 days later, they found him dead beside his destroyed tank. The medics said his heart just stopped, but the crew that pulled him out swore they heard him whispering the same words over and over in those final hours. "He marked me. He marked me. And now they're all coming." July 15th, 1943. Soviet tank repair depot, 30 kilometers east of Prokhorovka. Lieutenant Dmitry Olkov hadn't slept in 4 days. His face was black with soot and oil. His hands shook when he tried to light a cigarette. But his eyes were clear, sharp. The eyes of a man who had seen something impossible and lived to remember it. The other tank commanders avoided him in the mess tent. They said he had changed after Prokhorovka, that he talked to his tank like it was alive, that he claimed it moved on its own during the battle, steering toward targets before he gave the order. The commissar had already questioned him twice. Volkov told them the truth. They didn't believe him. How could they? How do you explain that your T-34 had become something more than steel and diesel? How do you tell them that in the chaos of July 12th, when 800 Soviet tanks collided with 400 German panzers in the largest armored engagement in human history, you felt your machine wake up? Volkov's T-34-85, hull number 174, sat in the repair yard with a cracked drive wheel and a jammed turret traverse. The mechanics said it would take 3 days to fix. Volkov refused to leave it. He slept beside the track cards, one hand always touching the hull, as if afraid it might disappear. The other crews whispered that he was losing his mind. But they didn't see what he saw. They didn't feel what he felt when 174 rolled into that field of fire and the world became a blur of smoke, flame, and screaming metal. They didn't know what it was like to become one with 40 tons of Soviet steel, to feel the Kharkiv V-234 diesel engine pounding like a second heartbeat, to sense the enemy before you saw them, to move and fire and survive on pure instinct while everything around you burned. The battle at Prokhorovka lasted 9 hours. When it ended, the field was a graveyard. Hundreds of tanks, German and Soviet, lay destroyed and smoldering in the summer heat. The grass was gone. The earth was scorched black. The air smelled like burning oil and something worse. Volkov's battalion had started the day with 22 tanks. By nightfall, only 7 remained operational. 174 was one of them. Not because of superior armor, not because of luck, but because something had changed inside that machine. Volkov felt it in the way 174 responded to his commands, anticipating his thoughts, moving before he spoke. His crew felt it too. The driver swore the controls moved on their own. The gunner claimed the cannon aimed itself. The loader said he heard voices in the ammunition compartment, whispering in Russian, urging them forward. On the morning of July 12th, Volkov's orders were simple. Advance at full speed, close the distance, overwhelm the Panthers before they could exploit their range advantage. The Soviet doctrine called it death or glory. The tankers called it suicide. But Marshal Rotmistrov believed in one principle above all others: quantity has a quality all its own. If they lost 2 T-34s for every Panther, they would still win. There were always more T-34s. The factories in the Urals were producing them faster than the Germans could destroy them. Simple design, sloped armor, reliable engine, a tank that could be built by farmers and driven by teenagers. The Panther was a masterpiece of German engineering. The T-34 was a weapon of Soviet will. When the fog lifted and Volkov saw the German line, he thought he was going to die. The Panthers opened fire at 1,800 meters. The first shot hit the T-34 to his left. It exploded instantly. The second shot missed by centimeters, the shell screaming past Volkov's head with a sound like tearing fabric. His driver accelerated, full throttle. The V2 engine roared, pushing 174 to 45 kilometers per hour across the uneven ground. They closed the distance in minutes that felt like hours. A Panther shell struck their frontal armor and bounced off, deflected by the 45-degree slope. Another grazed the turret. Volkov's gunner fired back, aiming low at the Panther's tracks. Miss. Fire again. Hit. The Panther slewed sideways, immobilized. They didn't stop to confirm the kill. They just kept moving. That's when Volkov felt it. A presence. Not hostile, not friendly, just there. As if 174 had become aware of itself. The steering responded before his driver touched the levers. The turret turned toward targets before Volkov identified them. They rammed a Panther from the side, crushing its suspension, then backed away before its gun could depress enough to fire. They flanked another, circling like a predator, pouring 85mm shells into its vulnerable side armor until it brewed up in a column of black smoke. Volkov didn't remember giving most of these orders. He just remembered feeling connected to something larger than himself. A machine that had absorbed the fear and fury and desperation of 1,000 battles and transformed it into something new. A weapon with a purpose. A tank with a soul. When they finally stopped, Volkov realized they had penetrated 3 kilometers behind German lines. They were alone, surrounded by burning Panthers and disabled German infantry. And standing in the open hatch of his T-34, Volkov saw him, a German officer crawling from a destroyed Panther, blood streaming from his nose and ears. Their eyes met across the smoke, and Volkov raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, and pointed. Not in anger, not in triumph, just acknowledgement. One tanker to another. You fought well. You lost. Remember this moment. Remember what it cost. 3 days later, when the commissar asked Volkov to explain his actions, he couldn't find the words. How do you describe the moment a machine becomes more than a tool? How do you explain that in the heart of the largest tank battle in history, surrounded by death and fire and impossible odds, you felt something ancient and powerful wake up inside 40 tons of Soviet steel? He tried. He failed. So instead, he just touched the hull of 174 and whispered the same thing he had whispered every day since Prokhorovka. We are not just machines. We are the ones who survive. And 174, sitting silent in the repair yard with its cracked wheel and jammed turret traverse, seemed to hum in response, as if agreeing, as if remembering, as if waiting for the next battle.